Welcome, everybody, to the Illusion of Consensus podcast. I'm Professor Jay Bhattacharya, and I have here with me today my good friend, Dr. Joe Fraiman, who is an ER doc in Louisiana and also a fantastic scientist and scholar. Joe wrote probably the most important paper during the pandemic regarding the COVID mRNA vaccines. He co-authored this paper where he went back and reevaluated the randomized trials and demonstrated that in the randomized trials run by Pfizer and Moderna, the rate of adverse events in the vaccines were actually tremendously high, something on the order of 1 in 800, which, with serious adverse events, not necessarily resulting in death, but still high enough to be quite concerned. And because it was an evaluation of the randomized data, there were no concerns about, healthy vaccinee bias or whatnot. It was a very rigorous paper, and I think had probably the biggest impact in my thinking about the safety of the vaccines. Welcome, Joe. Thanks for joining me.
Yes, my pleasure. My pleasure to be here with you.
Joe, I invited you here because you have a new initiative that you've worked on with a whole bunch of very, very important and interesting doctors and scientists, something called the Hope Accord. And you and I were discussing it the other day, and I'm considering whether I should sign it. And I think at this point I was a little disinclined to sign it, but I think for reasons I think would interest listeners. And I'm really glad we get to have this conversation in public about, and maybe you'll convince me to sign it. So my mind is still open. But I thought it'd be very interesting for listeners to hear the content of the Hope Accord, the primary point, there's many important points in it, but one of the biggest sticking point is, should the FDA and other regulatory agencies pull the mRNA COVID vaccine from the market?
Yes, that is point number one of the Hope Accord, is the suspension of the messenger RNA COVID
right.
vaccine.
So we're going to have a long conversation, a bit of a conversation about that, about arguments pro and con for that. And then the rest of the Hope Accord, I think, is also equally important. So Joe, why don't you first start by introducing the Hope Accord so listeners can understand what we're going to be talking about?
The Hope Accord, I came together with 12 other physicians and scientists to write the Hope Accord. The initiative was created actually just really to clean up the mess that the medical system has gotten us into. And the number one point on this is asking for the suspension of the COVID-19 vaccine. And I could just walk us through quickly. There's 5 points on it. It's asking for the suspension of the COVID-19 messenger RNA vaccine products. Then there's asking for a comprehensive reevaluation of the safety and efficacy of all COVID-19 vaccine products, the immediate recognition and support for the vaccine injured, restoration of ethical principles abandoned during COVID-19 era, and addressing the root causes of our current predicament. And we are looking for essentially signatures from around the world to sign this to show that there is a large amount of support for these concepts. So,
as best I can tell, you've drawn a lot of very prominent signatures. Over 1,000 doctors, sort of scientists, medical professionals have signed the Hope Accords. So it seems like it has actually struck a real positive note in a very large number of scientists. Maybe not so much those in power, but many of the scientists that were concerned about the lockdowns, the school closures, the vaccine mandates, and about the safety, the mRNA vaccines and other vaccines, about COVID vaccines, have signed on.
Yes.
And even people that were maybe less so have signed on. It seems like you've struck a chord.
Yeah, I think so. It's only been released 5 days. This is today is the first day that I believe any of us have recorded any podcasts bringing attention to the Hope Accord. It's so far only been advertised through social media, and we already have about 30,000 people who have signed on to it.
30,000. Wow. Okay. Last to look 4 days ago, it was 1,000. 30,000. You guys have gone exponential.
Yes, it's gone. Yes, there's many people have been signing up onto it, and it's something that it's because I believe the way that we wrote it is it's inclusive. I believe to most viewpoints on this that are actually kind of the mainstream viewpoints, even though it's not let on in the mainstream media that this is the mainstream viewpoint, it's sort of one of these topics that people keep their opinion to themselves. They're concerned about what other people think, but if we can go through it, I think, as we said, there was some disagreement over the first point on if we should be suspending the messenger RNA vaccines. But I think the other 4 points are worth reading actually in detail, because I think that they bring attention to some important points that are just worth discussing for the public to hear. And then,
no, I do think. I applaud you guys for putting this forward. I think this is a much needed conversation, and I'm really pleased to see that it's taking off. But I do think that it's worth. Because for some of the listeners of the Illusion of Consensus podcast, they'll say, "Well, of course, it's obvious that we should ban this vaccine. It's been destructive." And I think it's helpful for us to have the conversation that we had the other day in public, so we can understand what uncertainties I think remain, and why, even if you think that the way that the vaccine was handled was a bad idea, that at this point it may or may not be a good idea to ban it. So why don't you start by let's just discuss the points in order. The first point is pull the vaccine, the mRNA COVID vaccine, from the market. So what's the argument?
I think the argument's clear from a perspective of, there are people who don't believe the vaccine should have been released in the first place. For them, I believe that decision is obvious. Now, there's a wide spectrum of people today who would question if we should be continuing this vaccine, if we should continue recommending it, if we should keep it on the market. And the reason why is, since the release of it, even if for people who believed in the vaccine, they say, even if they're pretty certain, they feel pretty confident that it was beneficial. Even for them, if today, with the large majority, 99%, if not more, of our population has been infected with COVID-19, we have a variants of the COVID-19 vaccine are really no longer placing people in hospitals in the same way that they were. In fact, I personally haven't seen a COVID-19 hospitalization in over 2 years. And with that,
just so folks know, you were on the front line in 2020, seeing lots and lots and lots of COVID patients, many of whom died actually in your hospital.
I did. I saw many people die of COVID-19. It was during each wave of COVID-19. There was a large number of people that did die in my hospitals and were hospitalized. And that stopped in about January, February of 2022. And since then, we have not really been seeing many people. If personally, I've seen none. I know of other ER doctors who have seen a handful of COVID-19 hospitalizations, but the risk of the disease is very different. And the benefit of the vaccine is I believe, this unclear. It's pretty unclear at this point. So now we have a situation where vaccine benefits unclear, and the evidence for harms of this vaccine keeps on building. And I think that it's no longer logical to continue supplying this vaccine, to continue recommending it.
Okay, so let me start with some points of vehement agreement, I guess. The vaccine in 2020 that was released was released into a very, very different population from an immunological point of view. The fact is that the vast, vast majority of the population, whether you know it or not, have had COVID and recovered. And so that means very likely, the marginal benefit of the vaccine has got to be low, right? From an absolute point of view, right? It's not causing death at the same rate. And so the vaccine, if it has any beneficial effect, the maximum beneficial effect it could have is lower, because you've already have the immunity from having had COVID before and recovered, right? And so from when I evaluate drug products for deciding whether I personally think it should or should not be released, that's one of the first things. Like, what are the benefits? Now, the thing about this vaccine is that let's just go back to 2020, and this is actually the root, I think, of the reason why I'm a little hesitant to say yes, we should pull it from the market, is that the maximum benefit was very different for people that were at high risk of dying or of a severe reaction from COVID versus people who were at a low risk. there was an enormous difference in age. For instance, you and I have talked about this before, and of course, you know the epidemiological data very, very well. And so that for older people, in principle, whatever benefit there was going to be, the cap on it was going to be much higher than for young people, for especially for children who had vanishingly low rates of death from COVID infection when they were immune naive. The benefits were going to be very, very low. Whereas potentially for older people, they could be very high, especially if they're immune naive. I guess I don't know for certain, with sufficient certainty, that there's nobody left who could benefit from it. Right? There could be, in my mind, there could be people who have very specific conditions that they're immune naive, or if they're immunocompromised or whatnot, for whom this vaccine could be of benefit still. And so I'm a little uncomfortable pulling the vaccine off the market when I have that uncertain. Now, I should preface that. I should say that I really wish that the regulators had forced the vaccine manufacturers to make that argument for themselves with actual data, rather than the kind of speculation we're having.
Yeah.
But the right thing to do in that sense is then to have the regulators do that, like ask them to produce better data, so we specifically say now, given the population we have, who still benefits.
Yeah, no, I understand completely actually what you're saying, in that there's the possibility of there being a small population who has the potential to benefit from this vaccine. Am I correctly understanding?
That's exactly the argument.
And I would say that is possible. That is definitely possible. You brought up the immunocompromised. Maybe it's people over the age of 80. Maybe it's people over the age of 70. But the reality is that we actually have no idea who that population is that we're referring to that may have a benefit from this vaccine. And under the current, if we continue with the current way that we are dealing with this vaccine, which is recommending it to everyone 6 months and up, I don't see how we're ever going to identify that population. So we're just, even if they tried to limit who we were giving it to, I don't even know how would we come up with the group that would benefit it. And even just saying the most hypothetical benefit, like the immunocompromised are a good example, but the immunocompromised may also be at a high risk from the harms of this vaccine. And so we'd be giving them a drug that we would say, okay, here's this drug. You have a potential for benefit. And then the patient would be like, okay, it's right, but it's relative. Like, we know that the benefit's higher. And we respond, no, actually we have no idea. We never even tested it in your group. So they're like, well, then why are you recommending it? Well, we're recommending it, but we don't have evidence to support that the benefits are outweighing the harm. We are currently doing that for the entire population. We're saying everyone should take this, and we have no idea if this is making you live more or keeping you out of the hospital. I think that if we suspend this vaccine, and that would then force our industry to identify that group, and it would force them to do the trials that are necessary to know where this is beneficial. And if those trials existed that showed, okay, this group, hey, if they showed it for everyone, if they showed that the vaccine kept everyone out of the hospital, then we would all want it. We'd all take it. But now we have no idea if that group even exists. It's unclear. And if they do exist, we don't know who they are. And I don't see how, because of a theoretical potential of this group existing, how we would ever identify them under the current situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess I'm imagining, and you make a good point. So this is just an act of imagination in a sense. A responsible regulatory agency, not the FDA we actually have, going to the drug manufacturers and saying, Pfizer, Moderna, whatnot, and saying, look, prove it.
Yeah.
Prove it. Show us a randomized trial not with a meaningful clinical endpoint and a population you think benefits, and prove it with the randomized trial. Like I could imagine a responsible agency saying that as a condition for continuing the vaccine on the market, the mRNA vaccine.
I believe that our FDA, there and the drug regulatory bodies around the world have essentially put themselves in a position where they really look like they don't know what they're doing to the entire population, and we no longer can trust them. And I believe until they actually do withdraw this vaccine, then everything that they do going forward is under suspicion. If they can't say to the drug companies, the pharmaceutical industry, that we need to withdraw this, and you guys need to prove who's benefiting from this. And when we have that data, if they can do that, my presumption is if they pulled it, despite the possibility of making billions of dollars, if they can demonstrate that this vaccine has a net benefit today, I don't even think that they would attempt the trial, because I don't think that they have the confidence that they could identify the group who would get this benefit. And this would make them billions if they could, if it was withdrawn. But I'm not so certain that they would. I think they would drop it.
I mean, I guess I have also in the back of my head this very, very famous incident in the history of regulation of pharmaceutical products of this product called Thalidomide, which you know the story well, Joe. But let me just retell it. In the early 50s, I think it was, there was a product called Thalidomide that was marketed in Europe to pregnant women. The idea was that this product would reduce the symptoms of morning sickness, nausea and all that comes with being pregnant sometimes. And it was approved in Europe, but not in the United States. There was a sort of a heroic FDA employee who was asking for better data, and as a result, it didn't get approved in the United States. A year or so after the approval in Europe, there was a distressingly large number of babies born without limbs. This massive birth defect, and it very quickly epidemiologists found that it was linked to having taken thalidomide during pregnancy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And in the United States, this led to a tremendous brouhaha that led to the Kefauver amendments passed. Kefauver amendments essentially authorized the FDA to regulate not just the safety of pharmaceuticals, but also the efficacy of pharmaceuticals. Yep. And it was seen as a big victory for the FDA that first, that they had not approved thalidomide for use in the United States, and then second, that giving it more power to hold drug manufacturers to account before the products were put on the market.
Yeah.
So that's a big. That's still in my head as a major part of the story. But there's a postscript to this, which is in the 90s, thalidomide was actually finally approved by the FDA, and it was approved for use in HIV patients who were suffering from wasting, they were nauseated, wasting, and it was really quite a useful drug. It might still be. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've looked at literature. But the point is that I'm trying to make here is that, and why I bring this up is that that group of HIV patients who benefited from the thalidomide could have benefited longer had somehow the FDA managed to put a black box warning or something to say, do not let pregnant women anywhere near this drug. But it's approved for use for other things, we're going to force drug companies to show us who it could be used for other things. It's still used now, I think, for various for nausea, and as long as it has nothing to do with and nowhere near any pregnant woman. So in the history of the regulation of drugs, you often have these kinds of situations where we don't know, and maybe we prematurely say, let's get rid of it.
I don't think you're seriously suggesting that they should have kept thalidomide on the market with no known clear indication. That seems, and then waiting until this was in the 1950s and 60s, right? So we're talking about waiting.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's still used for TB. I mean, I think there were potentially other uses for it that they could have. I think that like pulling it from the market delayed the time because people were just afraid to use it. Like they were completely scared of it. So like the act of pulling it is like it's like a thermonuclear bomb on the thing, right? That's the impact of it. And so you have on the one side, which I completely concede, you're absolutely right. The regulatory agencies in this context with COVID, what they've done is they've approved this and utterly undermined the public confidence in the agencies and of course in the drug itself. The uptake of the drug is almost, I mean, I'm talking the uptake of the COVID vaccines is very, very low.
Very low right now.
Right. And for the reasons we discussed, but for most likely most of the population don't stand to benefit much from it. So then to me, the only question then is what's the marginal benefit of pulling it from the market altogether, which is a thermonuclear bomb. You're not allowed to use this thing anymore versus allowing it to sort of putter along with black box warnings for the serious adverse events kinds of situations. Recommending 6-month-olds to take it is just, it's just ridiculous. Like there's no basis in the data to suggest that should ever have been done, and certainly continuing to do it makes no sense. So to me, that's the reason I'm hesitant here, Joe, is that I don't know which part of the situation we're in. Is this a situation where you should drop a thermonuclear bomb on this entire mRNA vaccine enterprise now, or should you put warnings in place, put restrictions in place, stop recommending it to people who obviously stand no benefit of it, like especially children, and then continue to allow there to be some research around the edges before you allow the pharmaceutical companies to market it at scale, if you will.
I think that I don't seriously believe that we'll ever find the group that you're talking about. I don't think that we know if they exist either. I think that we can acknowledge they may exist. That has to remain uncertain unless it's well studied and looked into. However, without the withdrawal of this product from the market, and if there stands to be billions to be made, if you can identify the group that's going to have a hospitalization benefit from, for example, the incentive for them to produce the data is that's there. It's there for them. And without the suspension, I believe that currently our current situation will sort of continue where, maybe 10% of the population is taking a product that we're uncertain about the harm benefit ratio. And I think that even to recommend to have the government come out and say, actually, we don't even know if this product is overall beneficial or harmful, I don't really see the advantage of that, because I believe that our industry would be able to take advantage of such a situation. And, they're not allowed to advertise it off label. So if the FDA said this product will keep on the market, but it's actually not indicated for anyone because we don't know who it's indicated for. So it's essentially on the market, can only be used off label, which I think is sort of what you're suggesting. I believe that is encouraging our industry to do things that are potentially harmful to people. They will, under the table advertise it to doctors. They'll do it through health departments. They'll do it through various means that they've had. I don't even know if the pharmaceutical industry did any advertising for the COVID-19 vaccine. They had their advertisers paid for by our government officials. So I think that we would be suggesting that the best option forward is to just allow it. I don't even know if that's ever happened. A drug that just stays on the market where all its indications are no longer recommended until we discover something further. And I believe that if it was suspended and there was any benefit of this, then then it's their responsibility it's the pharmaceutical industry's responsibility to demonstrate that those benefits exist. It is not our responsibility. It's theirs. And theirs alone.
Okay, so let me make one more argument. I mean, because I mean that's a very strong point. Like it is absolutely right. You're right that if it has literally there's no indication, and I guess I'd say is like maybe you could have a hypothetical, like a group that you think would be benefit like people over 85 or something, or I don't know who, and then like run a relatively quick study to try to like force them to run a quick study. I think it's hard to counter your point, because you're right. If you literally have zero benefit,
no,
you fail to produce any benefit. Sorry, if you fail to produce evidence of any benefit, then you know who would use it. It's I don't know. I mean, I think it's unlikely that you'd have. It's hard to imagine that you couldn't produce some subgroup. Let me pivot a little bit along these lines, because there are, we said 10%. I don't know exactly the number.
I threw a number
fraction
out
of the uptake
that's about there.
But I'll say this: there are people that believe in the thing, and you know I encounter them because I live in the Bay Area. Maybe you encounter them less, where like they get it routinely every few months because they're afraid that that if they don't, they're going to get COVID and die. Now, I think that objectively, I don't know that the vaccine helps them, but they believe it does. And you know, I don't. The question then is, what's the role of the regulator to say to that person that they should not take this product?
Yeah, I think that it's a reasonable argument that I think some people can have. It's sort of this libertarian like philosophy of saying that we should just be allowed to take any chemicals.
I mean, it doesn't have to like there's the right to try legislation and things like that. I don't know if it's libertarian exactly, but it's like, you know, like these people people take. I mean, they take all kinds of stuff,
sure,
you know, supplements and whatnot that have, you know, mixed evidence, if at best. And should the government say, look, you shouldn't take this until there's a proven benefit?
I believe that. Imagine if we took the thalidomide example and we said, you know, it's possible that the benefits of thalidomide outweigh the harms. We don't know yet, and let's keep it on the market. We'll put a black box warning on it. And then there were people who just believed in thalidomide and took it the whole time. That would have probably been a mistake. And I think that that's the whole purpose of a drug regulatory body is to do that. Without that, I mean, there's actually, I don't even understand what is the purpose of it. If we're just going to allow industry to come up with chemicals that they, you know, advertise to us to take, and then we just let us decide, and we let there's like the free market argument of like, okay, we could just let these chemicals do whatever they want. Except the reason we have a drug regulatory body is because that turns out to be a pretty bad idea. And people end up believing things that aren't true, and they're easily convinced by various types of salesmen to take a substance that's harmful. And we as a society decided to create a regulatory body. I almost would say that such an argument is it's an argument against having a regulatory body in general.
Yeah, I mean, I throw that argument out because I've heard it. I tend to agree with the argument you just made, that there ought to be a regulatory body that looks at this. At the same time, there are some, you know, like you have a basically untreatable cancer, and they're like new medications that have been people are still considering. I don't see why people shouldn't have access to those kinds of things.
I'm in agreement with you. I'm in complete agreement with you on that, and I believe that that's very different, because what we're talking about there are generally people who are either have diagnoses of terminal diseases for which typically there's no known treatment, or they're suffering from some condition that we're inadequately able to treat with current medication, and they want access to some novel medication. And I believe in that situation is very, very different than perfectly healthy people people who have nothing wrong with them right now taking a product like a vaccine before the condition, because there is no group in the world where you could say, okay, 100% of you are going to die of COVID-19, right? That group doesn't exist. But you could take a cancer and you could say, okay, you've gone through all of our known chemotherapies and you have terminal cancer and 100% of you are about to die. I don't know exactly how long you have, but you are all going to die of this cancer quite soon. That group's very different than even if we're talking about a fragile group of 80-year-olds. That they don't have a 100% death sentence from COVID-19. Only a small minority of them do. Very small number of them will actually die from COVID-19 if they catch it.
Hi, everyone. A quick word from our first and exciting sponsor, Alchemy Elements. Alchemy Elements is a powerful adaptogenic supplement. For those of you who don't know, adaptogens are a class of plant compounds, primarily herbs and mushrooms, which can help build the mind and body's resistance to stress. Alchemy Elements contains a very unique and carefully selected blend of 9 adaptogens, such as lion's mane, cordyceps, polygalaroot, and shilajit, and they can help boost energy, boost your immunity, and increase focus and overall stabilize your mood. It can have a wide array of effects, which can often depend from individual to individual, but it's a great way to start your morning and generally increase your focus and your energy levels. You can just pour 1 scoop of Alchemy Elements into your morning coffee or your protein shake or smoothie, and you're off to the races. It's a great way to start the day. I use it every day. I find that it can generally stabilize my mood levels and increase focus, especially if I want to get a big project done or finish a very important task. Alchemy Elements often is a great way to kind of start and get my focus going and get me primed for whatever task I want to accomplish. We're very excited and very happy to work with Alchemy Elements. We've been working with them for a couple of months, and now in this new iteration of the podcast, we're going to continue our relationship, which is very special to us because Alchemy aligns with our mission and values of individuals taking greater ownership of their personal, mental, and physical health and relying less and less on corrupt and flawed, generalized kind of medical advice. And less and less reliance on pharmaceutical drugs, and more of a general interest and focus on holistic health. For a limited time, Illusion of Consensus readers and listeners can get 10% off their first order using the code word illusion, or 30% off a subscription monthly order, where you can get a monthly shipment of Alchemy Elements delivered to you. For the subscription orders, you can also get with it a bonus gold kit to store your Alchemy Elements. Overall, I think Alchemy is a fantastic product. I highly recommend you check them out in the link below in this podcast, wherever you're listening, Spotify, Apple, Substack, Rumble, or YouTube. Just go to the link, use the code word illusion, and you can get your discount, and you won't regret it.
So now let me make an argument in favor of the Hope Accords on the harm side. I mean, point 1 of the Hope Accords on the harm side. This product is unlike many other products. The COVID mRNA products. They have the manufacturers of them have a liability shield. So if they do cause harm to people, then for the most part, there's very little legal recourse that patients have as a result of that harm. The results from the harm, they can't get compensated, and it reduces the amount of incentives by a lot for the manufacturers to do the kind of research that I think I was arguing that they ought to do, that the regulators should force them to do, because they don't. If they put it on the market and it causes harm, they're not liable. I think that is an argument in favor of point 1 of the Hope Accords,
and that's also our third point, which is supporting and recognizing the vaccine injured exist. Because if we consider people who have been injured by this vaccine, not only have they suffered a physical injury from this, they are ostracized from society. If you were, many people who have a vaccine injury, they don't even come forward to discuss it, and that's a serious problem, for their own mental health. It's also a serious problem for the scientific enterprise, for science to figure out what is going on. Yet a huge percentage of the people who have vaccine injuries aren't even comfortable coming forward with it because they're scared of being called different names. It doesn't allow us to even identify what kind of harms the vaccines are causing, at least to quantify them. So the problem is wider. It's wider than just that the industry isn't coming forward. It's not. It makes it almost impossible for us to quantify the extent of vaccine injury.
Yeah, and the vaccine injured are gaslit, right? They in the Missouri versus Biden case, and in the congressional investigation of the Biden administration's interactions with social media companies, one very consistent theme throughout 2021 and into 2022 was the administration, in order to convince the population that there were no harms from the vaccine, would go to social media companies and tell them to take down sort of groups that were discussing vaccine injuries with each other. The vaccine injured people would look for suggestions for like what worked for them, and they would share information. And the Biden administration said to take those private groups down, even though they were sharing true information. Essentially, they were told that they were imagining things when they weren't. So in a sense, there's both a physical injury and a kind of a moral injury caused by this, where the people start to doubt even their own sanity.
Yeah, and having our government intervene with censoring people who wanted to talk about their vaccine injury in public, and to censor those is quite cruel and reprehensible. And also, to the same point, it prevents us from understanding what's going on. These Facebook social media groups have become a tool actually for identifying the harms of various pharmaceuticals that were unknown previously, and that is to delete these accounts, delete those sites it's unconscionable. It can't be defended. It's simply not good for society for us because some people don't believe them is maybe, I guess, would be the reason to do it. They don't believe what they're saying. They don't believe what they're feeling. They don't believe what they're experiencing. And I definitely don't think that the government should be telling people that they don't believe that their injuries are real. That's not their place. It's definitely not the place to tell them that they're not allowed to talk about it in public.
I mean, it was a propaganda campaign, right? That's the central thing. It's in the propaganda. The truth doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you harm the people that you're sort of. I mean, essentially, those people were public enemy number one in 2021 because the existence of those people, which your study, in sort of so amply demonstrated existed just from the randomized trial data. They were a threat to the government's goal of making 80-90% of the population get the vaccine.
Yes, that was their goal, and the propaganda that we experienced was actually quite surreal. I remember at some point, I don't remember through the COVID years when it was, but I remembered seeing propaganda very like firsthand, and just that experience to me was quite surreal because my only experience really with like kind of really, really extreme propaganda like that is actually in museums, and it's in museums of events that were pretty despicable and terrible events. There's few museums when we look back on government propaganda and say, thank God for that government propaganda and censorship that took place during this era. It was a really good decision. It's pretty universally been frowned upon, and every time we look at it from historically.
Yeah, I mean, it struck me that that the propaganda needed a target. In this case, it was the unvaccinated. Like there were you could see it with the way that the Biden administration talked about the unvaccinated. These are the ones. It's not just Biden, of course. It was like the leaders around the world said exactly this, very, very similar things, essentially saying that the unvaccinated are the reason why this disease is here still. They're the irresponsible people. The passports made it so that they were second-class citizens, essentially. Right? You couldn't go into libraries. You couldn't go into coffee shops. You couldn't in Canada. You couldn't travel across provinces. You couldn't go take public transport. And it was essentially in order to demonize a class of people that were socially undesirable. Effectively, it was a kind of like othering of a vast number of people on the basis of, even if there was evidence that the vaccine stopped you from getting and spreading COVID, that's a fundamental civil rights violation. What point? I was like, what's it? 0.4 on the Hope Accord was about ethics,
the abandonment of ethical principles. Mm-hmm. And also we also discuss, when we discussed the vaccine injured, that many of these people took this under coercion, and I believe that a lot of people don't even realize that they themselves may have taken this vaccine under coercion. Because there's the obvious one where you took it to keep your job, or you took it to stay in college, but also not allowing people to travel or to attend any various hospitalities, such as restaurants or sporting events. That's coercion as well, and we coerced people into taking a medical product rather than what I believe the medical field is supposed to do. That if we think the population is supposed to take a medical product, we should convince them why they should take this medical product, not coerce them into retaining their rights as just a normal citizen of our country. To that, it's a real violation of all the ethical principles that we were taught in medical school. That we have the decision to make these. We have the right to make these decisions for ourselves.
Yeah, that the idea of informed consent is probably like item number one in medical ethics. Yeah. Like you learn about, right? So like the idea is that that doctors are not, and the medical field are not God that can order you to do something you don't understand. If we're going to convince somebody to take a medical product, they have to understand what the harms and benefits are. You have to convey to them as honestly as you can what those are, what the evidence actually says, and then they get to decide. I'll say one other thing about the coercion. It's still ongoing, Joe, right? So you still have, I think like 20 some colleges in the United States still won't allow you to enroll unless you have taken the vaccine.
Yes.
And I don't even know what up to date means in this case. Like if you took the 2 vaccines in 2021, are you up to date? But haven't taken any of the boosters, are you up to date? You have to have taken like 9, the 2 vaccines plus 7 boosters. I've lost count. Nobody can tell me what up to date really means here. And to require young men identified as having high rates of myocarditis to take it in order as a condition of going to some university. A lot of them are like historically Black universities still have them. Pitzer College in Claremont still has them. Some of the small liberal arts colleges still have them. These requirements. It makes absolutely no sense. And if you have a green card, if you're applying for immigration to come to the U.S. and you won a green card, you're required to be vaccinated to come into the United States with the COVID vaccine. Why? Like, what is the purpose of it? It violates informed consent rights pretty fundamentally. And I entirely agree with you. It was as if medical ethics did not matter to most of medicine. And the consequence is that people now trust doctors much less than they once did.
I would also just point out that I think that it's to do this to immigrants who are entering the country is really it's a pretty disturbing message to send to new immigrants to our country, that this is your introduction to American values, to introduce them to something that I think is actually quite contrary to our standard American values, to force medical products onto our new citizens. I believe the message that we are sending there is totally incorrect in terms of what our entire American principles are.
I guess let me push back a little bit there, because there may be some conditions from where you come, like, I don't know, yellow fever. I know there are things that are not common in the U.S. Where you say, okay, well, you ought to take this before you enter the United States.
I'm in agreement.
Right? The issue. So then the issue then is not just that you can't take products, that you can't require some products. There has to be some real reason for those. Like there has to be some real data that distinguishes. Like, so if you have a disease that's endemic in one small part of the world, and people are coming from that part of the world, and the idea epidemiologically is to reduce the spread of it from one part of the world to others, then maybe it makes some sense. But here you have a disease that's endemic everywhere on Earth.
I agree with you, and I think that with all principles that exist, there are places where different principles will come head to head, and we don't have absolute free speech. Classically in this country, there are certain things that you can't say that we agree are not protected under free speech laws. And with all of these principles, there's going to be cases on the edge of saying, okay, if we allow total freedom on this principle, then we're going to have a disaster in this other area. And those things have to be balanced. But to do it, to violate a principle for an intervention that has that we do not have a clear known benefit, definitely not for reducing transmission, and also is potentially going to be resulting in greater harm to that individual than benefit to them. To violate a principle under that such a circumstances it's not a logical approach, and it gives our new immigrants, I believe, the wrong lesson for a wrong understanding of what our country stands for.
Right. So the idea is that the country you're coming from and you as a human being are somehow unclean, much less clean than the country you're coming to, the United States, on the basis of the idea that there's COVID over there and we need to clean you up before you come over here so that you don't bring COVID from over there to over here. It's ridiculous. There's COVID over here also, right? Americans are not clean in that sense. So why require it for incoming immigrants? It makes literally no sense. Actually, let's take a little bit of a detour, because there's like an element here of something you said I think is really important to explore a little more. What has the impact? Now, it's one thing to say let's pull it now, right? And I think the stakes in some sense are not as high as they might have been, let's say, in December 2020, right? And so the question is, what was the impact of the vaccine on all-cause mortality? I would love to have an answer to that question. And it's interesting because the randomized trials did not answer that question, at least not in a satisfactory way. Right? The mRNA vaccines in the randomized trials, there was a fantastic study done by Christine Stable-Ben and her group, asking what effect did the mRNA vaccines have on all-cause mortality during the running of the randomized trial. And actually, the vaccine arm had higher all-cause deaths than the control arm, although there was no statistically significant difference because the trial was not statistically powered. So it could easily just be statistical artifact, right? But she found the opposite for the adenovirus vaccines. Right, there was actually lower all-cause excess deaths for the adenovirus vaccine versus the control arm. So that is the most certain knowledge that I personally have on, does it cause all-cause excess? Does it cause excess deaths or not? Did it save lives or not?
And the question is clearly of great importance to, and it would have been ideal had the study been run properly, or to at least demand for all-cause hospitalization. And we would have known the answer to that question if they had powered it with the group of people who, you were talking about before, who are the most likely candidates to benefit. If they chose if the study was run in frail elderly people with various risk factors and powered to look at hospitalization or even death, more ideally, we would have a much better understanding of that. But because that was never done, we're sort of stuck with really less reliable types of data to investigate these questions. And what we know is that in the past, whenever we've relied on these types of observational data to answer questions of benefit, we've been led astray. We've been led astray many, many times. And because we've actually, allowed the treatment with these, we acknowledge that we probably caused a good amount of harm. For example, I know people raise hormone replacement therapy as a classic example of this, of when we were giving hormone replacement therapy to prevent heart attacks and prevent strokes and prevent breast cancer. When they finally did the right randomized trial, we discovered it caused heart attacks, strokes, and breast cancer. So this is a common issue of that medicine seems to forget, that relying on observational data to identify benefits is just a very unreliable tool to do so.
So we know that. I mean, I actually, I should say, in like as a way of like of full disclosure, much of my publishing career involves looking at using observational data on questions that you can't run randomized trials on. And so it's not that you should never use them. It's just you have to be very, 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 very careful that you don't confuse correlation and causation. It's very easy to do that with observational data.
The major issue is identifying benefits is very prone to problems because of something called the selection bias, or as you mentioned earlier, a healthy user bias. You end up with different types of people, are the people who take the drug, and then you end up, what we've seen classically is that the observational data, they're all the biases within them tend towards leaning towards identifying benefits that are not truly there. In the case of hormone replacement therapy, I mean, the benefit that we were seeing in the observational data was actually the exact opposite of what we learned was actually the case. So this is this bias is actually quite strong, and that's in contrast to, I think, what you're referring to is identifying rare events. So when you have a rare adverse event that there's no way of identifying it in the trial, but if you have a large increase in a vaccine or drugs, large relative increase, then that's where observational data is useful. So for myocarditis in the COVID-19 vaccine, that's the most obvious case. That's what we're referring to here, because it increased the chances of it by 5-fold or 10-fold, and the trial and observational data can see that. But because myocarditis happens at a rate of 1 in a million, maybe or less, we didn't really see any myocarditis in the trial, and even though it increases it down to 1 in 10,000 maybe, or sometimes say people even put it at a higher rate, but that's where observational data is most useful. But for finding small differences between groups, it's easy that, like you're saying, confounders will easily make us lead to mistakes.
Yeah. And so like in the context of COVID-19 vaccines and the mRNA vaccines and mortality, there are widely disparate studies that with modeling methods that are, I just can't believe that anyone took the modeling method seriously, suggesting that the vaccines have saved millions and millions of lives. And then other studies using correlational methods that I just don't I would normally say let's go back and do a more careful study to really know if we're getting the right answer, finding that the COVID-19 vaccines killed millions of people. And I look at both of those sets of studies and I say those do not meet my standard for sufficiently rigorous, so I can say with some confidence I know what the answer is.
I would agree. And in science and medicine, we talk about that. We have a confidence interval in studies to talk about what's the possible of results, and you list, so if you had to offer a confidence interval of what happened with the vaccine, you could say, okay, it's possible that it saved a couple million people. It's possible that it killed a couple million people. I don't know. That's kind of where we're at. That's like what existing science can say. And the whole purpose of scientific experimentation is to reduce that confidence interval, to reduce it, to have greater confidence in what the result is. So you have a smaller confidence interval, you have a better understanding of what we're looking at. And that's the whole purpose of doing more studies on these topics. And we're still at the point where we have just complete uncertainty on a lot of these issues. And I believe that a major issue that exists within, I think, mainstream science on this is the types of studies that are getting published are completely biased as well. And we raise this in the Hope Accord, that there's a problem with publication bias. So if you,
it's funny because I can almost exactly predict what the results of someone's going to find in answer to that question of how many lives, what impact did the COVID vaccines have on mortality. I can almost exactly predict without looking at the paper itself, just at the authors and with their previous statements, what they're likely to find. That's a bad situation in science, because what that means then is you're not having a meeting of the minds. People coming in and writing papers that look scientific, but really have, in a sense, built into the assumptions a predetermined result.
Well, it's possibly that, it's possibly that extreme, but it's when there's publication bias, you end up with a pretty serious problem of not knowing what isn't published. So there's a group of people who would never publish anything that may put the vaccines into a bad light. So they may have done there may have been thousands of studies that have done. In fact, I presume there have been thousands of studies that have been done that have just never been published because their results would have either got rejected by journals, because I know anyone who tried to publish literature that was shining a, not the greatest light on the vaccine had a lot of trouble. But even if they, didn't take the hint from the multiple rejections of their study and they knew it was a good study, I think there's a large amount of them who just would have been scared to publish it. Or, there's the people who were scared but thought it was true. There's the people who said, no, I know the vaccines were of great benefit. My study results are wrong. But what that does is that litters the field of science, so that it creates a total distortion of the data that we're looking at. And it makes it impossible to take that observational data together and come to any sort of reasonable conclusion on what it means when the scientific environment is really like biasing us to publishing only certain kinds of results, so that you get 1 in 10 that are real and then the other 9 are false. It will create a total distortion of reality.
I mean, the situation is really quite dire, because what's happened is, let me just pick one example. We had Li Fang, a journalist, on the Illusion of Consensus podcast a few months ago. He discovered that the pharmaceutical company Moderna, which produces one of the mRNA vaccines, have created effectively a hit list of reputational damage done to people who were skeptical about the vaccines. They engaged tens of thousands of medical professionals to essentially spy in social media circles and gang up on anyone who expresses any thought that's skeptical about the vaccines. And it's not just Twitter. It's like, there's this video game bulletin board where they go make sure that no one says anything against the vaccines in these video game bulletin boards. And they destroy the reputations of anyone who writes, especially if they're writing reasonable papers that are published. They'll go after you to destroy your reputation, and call for your being fired. Essentially, you put yourself on a hit list of the drug companies if you write a paper that has a result that they don't like. And I suspect this has happened a long time. Like, I was reading about Merck when there was a scandal in the early 2000s. They had a drug called Vioxx, which was a pain reliever. It's supposed to reduce the risk of gastric bleeding or something. And what it did is it caused higher rates of strokes
and heart attacks.
The scientists who found this result, Merck put them on a watch list. They even sent spies around to the houses to follow people around, scientists around, who were exposing this result, which, because it was Merck made millions and millions of dollars off this drug. And so there's a track record. It's like the tobacco companies did the same thing, Joe.
Yes, and creating a large amount of data that like obfuscates the reality. So with Vioxx, what occurred is the reason we ended up discovering that Vioxx causes heart attacks and strokes was not from our continued great observational data and surveillance data. That actually failed, even though sometimes it did identify it, sometimes it failed to. But it was because it was an attempt at doing there was a randomized controlled trial where they attempted to use it to look to see if it reduced the incidence of colon cancer. And surprisingly, it did reduce the incidence of colon cancer, but it caused heart attacks and strokes at a greater rate. And that's what led to us realizing where these harms came from. And I think this almost brings us back actually to where I'm saying that I don't see them doing a randomized controlled trial with the COVID vaccine to look for colon cancer. I just don't see that happening. And so if there is a group out there that benefits from Vioxx, there might be, maybe it should only be given to people, and that's possible, but it's not worth not knowing that we currently have a product on the market like the COVID vaccine that we literally don't know if anyone's benefiting and we know that it is causing harm. So while there's uncertainty on this, I don't feel comfortable as a physician recommending it to anyone at this point, even though there's like a maybe benefit. It seems to me that I think that this would be wise to end this and to bring it back to those trials, do the thalidomide study, prove that it works for the group that it works for. And I think that we're sort of stuck without this suspension, and we're never going to figure that out if that group exists. We're going to continue giving it to all sorts of people who we could both agree probably shouldn't be getting it, and they will continue to get it. And I think, and our system will not be able to move forward and become, start in the process and taking the right steps to correcting itself and to becoming a reliable regulatory body. I'm not saying that signing the Hope Accord will create a responsible regulatory body, but it is in my mind, it's a necessary first step for them to suspend it. And I hope you reconsider. What's your thought?
Yeah, this has been a really interesting conversation, Joe. And but first, I'm grateful that you agreed to have this conversation with me, even though we agree on a lot of things, I think. But like this, it was fun to have a point where we disagree and talk about it civilly. I absolutely will reconsider. I have to think some more about this because you brought up some excellent points. Well, let's have this conversation when in a few weeks. I tend to make these decisions. It takes me a little while to get to come around to these.
You take your time.
Hope you'll be patient with my friend.
You can take your time. But for anyone else listening, if you agree that we need to suspend this and we need to return to our ethical principles of, I'm sure you agree with returning to the ethical principles of.
I think the points 2, 3, 4, and 5 are. They're very, very persuasive. I have wholehearted agreement. As I said, the main question in my mind is this like sort of delicate balance of sort of regulation and information, and what are the incentives that are going to be created in the regulatory bodies and in the drug companies. And let me ponder a little more.
Could you offer me just a scenario of where you think that where we could get it right, how we could get it right by not suspending it? How could we identify those people and keep it on the market the whole time?
The scenario is it's going to sound fanciful to you because the regulatory bodies have utterly failed. It sounds fanciful to me. Like the scenario is the FDA puts a black box warning on the thing for the vast majority of the population that have already had COVID, documented COVID cases. Or for anyone under the age of you pick some number, unless they have certain conditions where it's suspected, and then in the meantime, because especially for those people they're scared about COVID and they would still want it. That's the 10% whatever people are still taking. In the meantime, you tell the drug companies that if they don't produce a randomized trial for those groups, that they're still allowed to take it, it's going to get pulled after a certain amount of time.
But you
I mean, I could imagine
it's not possible.
that you could have. I mean,
that's not if it's.
I'm not. I just told you,
but
it's
more than
fanciful.
fanciful. It wouldn't even be legal to do. It would be if we have a product that's on the market that is they're advertising or allowed to advertise that they're saying it's for this group. You're not allowed to do a randomized controlled trial and offer a placebo to that. It would actually be that would not be considered legal. And also you.
Oh, I see. Because you're saying that it's recommended for that. It's as if they were recommended. It's already been approved for that group. Yeah, that's a good argument. I mean, because it would
be illegal. No one would give you permission to do such a trial because
the argument would be that, oh, look, we've already demonstrated the FDA has approved it because there's a demonstrated benefit.
The approval itself is claiming that we have demonstrated that the benefits outweigh the harms and that to do such a trial would be unethical. So to allow such a trial to exist,
I guess it's a very weird situation because what you have is the approval of a drug before you actually had the demonstration of a benefit of sufficient high quality,
and then they, as we now know from recent congressional testimony from Dr. Gruber, I believe, where he acknowledged, and I believe it was Gruber who.
This is for the boosters, right?
For the boosters,
Gruber was just for context. Steve Gruber and Steve Krause and Marion Gruber were two FDA officials in charge of evaluating the evidence on the COVID vaccine boosters and deciding whether to approve it, as also on whether the original COVID vaccine should get full licensing authority, not just emergency use authority. And they both resigned in 2021, I think, because they felt pressured to approve the vaccines before they were satisfied that the manufacturers had produced sufficient data to document the benefits of those.
So
products.
the approval of these vaccines now in congressional testimony, we know was essentially forced from politics, and so the approval itself is in my opinion is actually quite questionable in the first place, and to bring it back and the emergency use authorization, the emergency is over. So there's product actually, even by the way that we should judge what the FDA, how they approve drugs. I actually I'm not certain there's even the argument that its approval not even withdrawn. Its approval should be have retroactively canceled, given we now know that it wasn't approved under the proper circumstances, and that no longer the emergency no longer exists, and the emergency use authorization is no longer valid. It's even reasonable from rather than a full withdrawal. I think it's a question of even if the approval should have been given. They said in the congressional hearing that it was done so that they can mandate it, which is a serious violation. That's not the reason to approve drugs for the FDA. And if that's the only reason that we got approval on this in the first place, then I think we should be questioning its approval, and we should, if the only path forward is suspending it to get that, for it to be done properly and redone in the proper manner. I don't see any other way except for, I guess, like some sort of dream world where the pharmaceutical industry steps up to the plate and says, we're going to just do this because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, Joe, I might sign. I'm not one of these people. I go to the car dealership and then I listen to the pitch and then I'm like, I'll let me think on it. Usually takes me a while. So, but I do. You make a very persuasive case, my friend. Absolutely.
My pleasure, Jay. My pleasure to talk with you.
So, Joe, thank you for joining me on this Illusion of Consensus podcast. If you are interested in the Hope Accords, we'll include the link in the show notes so that you can go check them out for yourself and decide if you want to sign. Joe, thank you for all the work that you've done during the pandemic. I've learned so much from interacting with you and from your scientific work. Until next time, this has been Professor Jay Bhattacharya for the Illusion of Consensus podcast.
Has the dust settled from the COVID policy response? Far from it. The storms are many: inflation, learning losses, ill health, high crime, broken government services, displaced workers, substance abuse, mass loneliness, discredited science, real estate crisis, censorship, and overweening state power. The world is on fire with war, mass killings, crime, hunger, revolution. The lack of accountability, or even so much as an apology, is a foreshadowing. They'll keep their newfound powers and try it all again. Brownstone Institute is seeking answers, undertaking important research and publishing the results while providing fellowships for dissident scholars who have been professionally displaced. It's not about this one crisis. We urgently need to restore peace, prosperity, and integrity in science and journalism. Visit brownstone.org for more. We may never get to the truth, but we can get closer to the truth. There will be no stopping the efforts.